in name of the entire team of this webinar, I congratulate Dr. Sneha Gopi Krishna. Now, a number of enthusiastic participants from different parts of the country, including teachers, academics, etc. I welcome all of you to this session. Now, I conclude by inviting Dr. RAMAKUMAR to present his paper. Thank you. Sir, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. It's audible.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I thank the faculty members of the John Matthai Center and the students for having invited me to speak to you on this topic, which appears to be extremely important and significant. Now, I shall, in some sense, speak about the pandemic in the state and the pandemic in the second half of my lecture. But I would like to, because I'm speaking to an economics department, I would like to contextualize my argument a little bit before I come to the point per se. Now, the role of the state and the market and the debate around it is something that we learn and teach regularly in the classrooms of economics, that is in development economics courses and so on. So the debate between the role of the state and the market is something that every economics student in some sense goes through. But at the same time, the way in which we end up teaching this whole debate between the state and the market is in many ways following the mainstream economics literature and the mainstream economic textbooks that are available. So if you look at the textbooks on the relative roles of the state and the market, you will largely see that it is over a debate. It is a debate over the role of the state when the market fails, right? So the role of the state becomes important only when there is a market failure. Now, market failure occurs due to multiple reasons, as we know. It occurs because there may be public goods involved. You know, I don't need to elaborate on that. It may be due to public goods. It may be due to the presence of externalities. It may be due to the presence of moral hazard and adverse selection issues, as in the insurance markets. It could also be because there are increasing returns to scale in certain industrial sectors. So basically, if you look at a classic mainstream economics textbook, you will see that the role of the state is defined in this context, when there is public goods, externality, moral hazard, adverse selection, or if there are increasing returns to scale. However, as someone who largely follows a Marxist viewpoint on the analysis of the economy, I would like to approach the issue in a slightly different way. And I don't, while we all teach some of these things in the classrooms, but I would like to sort of bring in another facet of this debate so that we can understand this debate in a much better form. If you look at the economy as a capitalist system and the role of the state as well accordingly in a capitalist economy, in a sense, the debate has long been settled. You know, if you look at the early writings of Marx, he would actually say that Marx's one of the very important arguments of Marx was related to primitive accumulation. Primitive accumulation, Marx said, was the way in which the gates for the capitalist system are opened. Now, Adam Smith had made this point that the rise of the capitalist economy in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, or even maybe even before that, was largely because of the pre-existing savings of capitalists. Right. So, and because capitalists had savings, they were able to invest that, and then a capitalist economy, in a sense, began to grow. Marx's few chapters in his Capital are primarily devoted to contesting this argument of Adam Smith that there was a peaceful, smooth transition of a feudal economy into a capitalist economy. In fact, Marx at this point said that the rise of capitalism comes head to foot, dripping in blood and dirt. Right? So the argument of Marx was that capitalist economy did not emerge so peacefully and seamlessly as Adam Smith appeared to envisage with the pre-existing savings of capitalists. Marx said that capitalism came about primarily through an idea of dispossession. And in this idea of dispossession, Marx said that large numbers of people lost access to means of production, lost land, became landless, joined the large army of the labor force, which the capitalist economy required to run its economy. So this creation of a disciplined workforce, which was ready for supply for the capitalist economy in its factories and so on, became a very important feature of the idea of primitive accumulation that Marx described. In this process of primitive accumulation, Marx himself has written about it, and other economic historians have written about it later. You will see that the role of the state was crucial. Right? The role of the state was crucial, and that's what we are coming to. So capitalism, in this sense, capitalism has always needed the state to design policies for its benefits. Right? So for most developed capitalist nations, while growing, that if you look at, I'm just sort of quickly sort of giving a few points about what economic historians would tell us, capitalism has always required the state. So most developed capitalist nations, while growing, had adopted high levels of import duties to protect domestic industries, though many of them are today votaries of free trade, zero import duties, and so on. Right? But these same capitalist countries, in their phase of development, had adopted high levels of import duties to protect their industries. The other point that often comes about in economic history is whenever right at the time when capitalism was supposed to be expanding freedoms on a very mass scale across the new world that it was creating, the state in these countries was available for these capitalists to even organize slave trade from across the continents. So when capitalism required laborers, the state was ready to facilitate it by even organizing slave trade across the continents. Similar is the case of crisis, economic crisis or financial crisis. When crisis comes, capitalist powers have no qualms in using public money to save inefficient private firms, particularly banks that engage in speculation and so on in the financial sector. So the role of the state in aiding the process of primitive accumulation, and how the state has always played a role in the formulation of policies that ultimately aid the concentration and centralization of capital, is a very important facet to bring into this debate of the relative roles of the state in the market. So here, remember, in this way of looking at the problem, we are not looking at simply public goods, externalities, moral hazard, adverse selection, increasing returns to scale, etc. That is, a role of the state becomes essential only in certain specific or special circumstances. That is not what we are saying here. What we are saying is the capitalism requires the state on a rather daily basis to design policies to ensure that profits of capitalists are intact and are in fact growing, and when crisis strikes, be ready to use the public exchequer's money to save private firms, to save private capital from collapsing. So this way of looking at, my first point here is that when we say relative roles of the state in the market, we have to see it in a particular way. We have to see it in this particular premise. If you are somebody who looks at the economy as a capitalist economy, so. And if you look at the other literature, I mean, heterodox literature, not necessarily the Marxist literature, you will also see the idea of developmental state becoming very prominent over the years. Particularly in the East Asian context, you will see that you have developmental states which is a state characterized by a strong state intervention, which implements land reform, invests in education and health, engages in regulation and planning of the economy, and so on. So the idea of developmental state is also something that is discussed as fundamental to the idea of development in the East Asian literature, and that also appears in the non-mainstream literature. Now, so you can see that there are multiple ways of looking at this debate of the state versus the market. Now, if you look at the history, I'll quickly run through this part. The Great Depression of the 1930s was a classic demonstration of how essential the state becomes in regulating and planning the economy. And of course, saving it from crisis as well. This was a classic demonstration. The depression itself was a demonstration of the consequence of the domination of finance capital over the production sector. To save the capitalist system from collapse, John Maynard Keynes had recommended what he called a somewhat comprehensive socialization of investment in the economy. Nation states intervened with massive public investment, raised levels of employment, and then slowly moved out of the recession by the end of the war. After the war, Keynesian demand management and provision of a host of welfare measures were central to the economic policies in both the developed world and the developing world. Now, this conjuncture was highly favorable to growth and employment generation, as you would all know, leading many to refer to the 1950s and the 1960s up to the mid-1970s as what is called as the golden age of capitalism. Importantly, this period was marked by also a shift in the balance of class forces in favor of the working class. This meant that trade unions were allowed to flourish because capital needed the cooperation of labor to rebuild the economies of the European part of the world after the war, which were destroyed significantly. So this allowed labor to wrest major concessions from the ruling class, making use of their stronger bargaining position. And this conjuncture, that is the coming in of Keynesianism, the role of the state in a particular form, and the rising power of labor on the other side, together gave rise to what we call as the welfare state of today. The European welfare state was a product of this conjuncture in the post-war period, and it gave rise to a very strong system of social security. It gave rise to strong investments in education and health. For example, the National Health Service, one of the best health systems of the world in the United Kingdom, a capitalist economy nonetheless, is a result of this consensus that emerged in the post-war period. Now, this was the case of the 1950s and the 1960s. However, the situation changes from the 1970s and 1980s, where we witness the neoclassical counter-revolution ensures the return of what we call as the laissez-faire capitalism as the guiding ideology of world capitalism. The neoclassical counter-revolution was associated with concrete changes in the material conditions under which economies across the world operated. So there was a radical transformation in both the structure and management of the economy, beginning from the 1960s, late 1960s onwards. This was a quantitative transformation as well as a qualitative transformation, and it was very significant in that it finally seemed to offer the historic possibility of creating a truly unified global capitalist economy from the 1970s onwards. So this was a new stage in the centralization of capital that in some sense shaped the material ambience for the neoclassical counter-revolution. The enormous growth of technology, the internet, transport, and so on was aiding this process of growth of the global capitalist economy as a unified sort of an economy in this period. So as I said, it was a new stage in the centralization of capital. So it is also this time when monetarism returns with some kind of a vengeance into mainstream economic policy, and you ultimately see this kind of laissez-faire capitalism being packaged into what is called as the Washington Consensus by the late 1980s, and being implemented in many developed and developing countries. Now, this period from the 1970s and 1980s clearly marks a period where the role of the state is significantly weakened and the role of the market is significantly expanded. And this, in some sense, is not something that happens in an innocent form. This is something that is a result of a certain change in the correlation of class forces globally. This is a product of that kind of a political economy context that we saw across the world. This became a very important problem as well. Now, this is also a period when capital for finance, or capital rather not for finance, capital as finance comes up in a very important way. You don't see a merger of the identities of finance and industry, but we clearly see a situation where the sphere of finance began to dominate the sphere of production in this period after the 1970s. So there was enormous mobility of capital across the world, and this new mobility of capital was not characterized by rising trade transactions across the globe. That is not that did happen to an extent, but that does not explain the full story. The new mobility of capital was largely explained by short-run speculative capital flows across boundaries of countries. Alongside, you also see the emergence of a slew of innovative financial instruments that are unleashed to meet the growing needs of financial mobility. On the one hand, and also to hedge against the rising risks on the other hand. You see the emergence of derivatives, mutual funds, and a multiplicity of financial instruments that proliferate across the world in this period to aid this process of globalization of finance as well. This is the process that you see from the 1970s onwards. A corollary to the domination of globally mobile finance was also the shrinking of the space available for the state to follow autonomous economic and financial policies. Growing economies that are open on the capital account invariably attract capital inflows, and the size of these capital inflows is often significant relative to the size of the economy itself. So this turns into some kind of a Gordian knot, as we call it. You open one knot and another knot becomes tight. The sustenance of capital inflows becomes dependent on certain parameters of the economy. So any effort by the state to expand economic activity domestically or to adopt a kind of a redistributive social policy makes speculators uneasy, because this might involve taking in more debt from the market. So the speculators begin to worry about inflation, interest rates, and the resulting fiscal deficit, exchange rate depreciation, and so on and so forth. When speculators are overly worried about the stability of the economy as depicted by the fiscal deficit, capital flight outwards begins. And as the volatility in the financial flows leads to the dampening of growth, governments will try to somehow appease this capital to come back or to stem the outflow of capital by rolling back these policies. So they cut upon fiscal deficit. In order to cut fiscal deficit, they are now ready to cut expenditures in the economy. They are not ready to tax the rich. They are ready to cut expenditures in soft sectors like education, health, nutrition, and so on and so forth. And this gives rise to a different kind of crisis. This also, for the developing world, meant the death of what is called as the development project that was inaugurated in the post-war period, which the process of death had begun by the 1970s itself. Now, in the new era of finance, you will very clearly see that the role of the nation state stood undermined vis-a-vis the development project. With the confidence of international speculative investors attaining the status of some kind of a holy cow as a policy imperative that cannot be questioned in any form. So no fiscal deficit, no high expenditures for the government, because it will lead to a lack of confidence, loss of confidence on the side of international speculative investors. So domestic economic policies become a prisoner of the interests of global financial speculative capital. That became a very important outcome of this kind of a situation. As a result, interest rates were kept high to incentivize financial inflows. Financial sector was deregulated to ensure retention of finance and preventing outflow of finance. Government expenditures were compressed to keep fiscal deficits controlled. Labor rights were restricted to allow free entry and exit of firms. public enterprises were disinvested or sold off to ensure financial discipline in the public sector, and external trade was liberalized. WTO came at this time to attract inflows of foreign capital in export-oriented sectors and encouraging export growth. So this set of policies was what was packaged as a Washington Consensus by the late 1980s, and it followed into the 90s and 2000s. We all know that the actual experience in with the Washington Consensus in the developing world has been profoundly negative. You will see that the levels of economic growth in the 90s and 2000s have been typically below the growth rate of the 1950s and 1960s. Rates of poverty reduction have slowed down. The number of people forced to live in income poverty, even if you take a destitution cutoff line of $1 a day, continues to be appallingly large across the economy, across the world economy. Inequalities and economic insecurities have been fostered on a very massive scale. You have very low social welfare. The liberalization of trade has been deeply asymmetric, and this has led to huge adverse impacts, particularly for the developing countries. That the neoliberal promise that trade liberalization would lead to the expansion of world trade in primary commodities and thus export-led growth has largely remained unfulfilled. All these issues are in front of us by the 2000s. Come the 21st century, this sort of a situation takes new forms. You see, by the late by the 90s and the 2000s, beginning with the era of Bill Clinton in the United States, where interest rates are lowered, begin to be lowered in order to revive growth in the American economy. You see an enormous flight of capital across the world, and this finance capital largely comes to the markets of the developing world, and these developing country markets are now home to an extraordinary inflow of capital inward, and this creates enormous complications in these countries. There's enormous growth of money in this period because fiscal policy and its legitimacy has already been undermined. You basically see that monetary policy becomes a very important way in which policy begins to be conducted. Interest rate becomes the instrument which is used again and again to revive the economy from periods of recession. The fall of interest rates continues to such an extent that by the 2000s, interest rates in many financial markets or many economies had almost reached zero levels. And by today, they have now reached negative levels. Now, if you basically want to keep money in the bank, you have to pay the bank. You won't get an interest back. We are in such a situation where the enormity of the quantity of money around us has led, and the dominance of monetary policy and the weakening of fiscal policy has led to a situation where interest rates are so much lowered across the world that it does not anymore have any value in the running of economic policy. It has been made sterile by the nature of policies that we have followed over the years. This is the time when the global financial crisis of 2008 comes in. I'm not going into the details of what caused the global financial crisis. We know that there's enormous amount of speculation and so on and so forth. But in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, you will see that governments across the world, which have over a period of time advocated free market policies in the financial and real economy for a long period of time, these same governments were ready to make interventions that were unthinkable before the crisis. For example, buying stakes in banks to restore confidence in banks and save them, and in many cases even nationalizing private banks, which we thought was past after the 1960s. They underwrote risk, they injected capital into the money markets. It was a classic case in some sense of socializing losses and privatizing profits. So in order to save private capital, private banks and so on, governments in these capitalist countries were at that point, just 12 years back, were ready to intervene in the economy in unprecedented ways to save the capitalist economy from collapsing. This again shows the way state functions under capitalism. Here we are not talking about the mainstream way of looking at the state versus market debate. I'm talking about a very fundamental principle that guides the activities of the state in a capitalist economy. When the economy goes into a crisis, all holy principles that have unlaid the growth of the capitalist economy are kept aside. The state is brought in with all its power and might. The public exchequer is drained to the extreme to save private losses. That becomes a very dominant feature of the role of the state under this kind of a capitalist crisis. So as I said, by this time, monetary policy has almost been rendered sterile by low or negative interest rates. There's too much of money around. The fiscal policy is the only way available for the government. And after 2008, you will see that the governments in the developing and the developed world intervene in the economy in unprecedented ways to save the economies from crisis. Now, this, however, while saving the economy became a very important feature, it should be noted here that it did not quite lead to a redefining of the role of the state in ways that we existed in the 1950s and 60s. For example, I'll take this example because it's useful to sort of bring the pandemic into our debate. Look at the experience of public health sector. In even the developed capitalist world after the 1970s and 1980s. The period of neoliberalism after the 1970s was also a period when public investment in health came down significantly in the capitalist world. Remember, even in the capitalist world, what we call as the developed world today, the rise of health indicators, that is the improvement of health indicators, that is fall in death rates, fall in infant mortality rates, fall in maternal mortality rates, rise of life, are not features of the 19th century. They are features of the 20th century. That too, features of the second half of the 20th century. This happened primarily because the emergence of new science and scientific and technological advances in public health, the discovery of germ theory, Koch's principles, discovery of vaccines, etc., which took place in the later half of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, they became incorporated into the public health system of these developed countries. So when the NHS, the National Health Service, was initiated in the late 1940s in the United Kingdom, all these policies, all these advances in medical health and technology were absorbed into the running of the public health system. That is the time when public health indicators in the developed world begins to improve. So it is not in the 19th century or early 20th century that the public health indicators begin to improve. It's only in the second half of the 20th century that you see that phenomenon taking place, and the role of the state was fundamental in that the state began to invest in public health, invest in the in employing doctors, in employing nurses and so on, care staff, creating hospital infrastructure and hospital beds. These were features of the late second half of the 20th century. Now, this intervention of the state was also weakened in the post-1980s period. The funding for the NHS in the United Kingdom becomes very less. The public health systems of many capitalist countries, their ability to handle or deal with or address or respond to the kind of pandemic that we see today was considerably weakened by poor public investment in public health in this time. So this is the context in which you see the pandemic coming in, the COVID-19 crisis coming. You see one small point I should mention here. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we know that there were economies were not in great shape, neither in India nor across the world. There was a fall in GDP growth rates across the world, particularly in 2017, 18, 19, and so on. there was enormous rise of inequality. The rise of inequality was to such a level that even a kind of fiscal stimulus that you provide, given the kind of inequality, its linkage effects in the economy, the impact of the multiplier of that public investment would be considerably weak, given the kind of inequality that exists, because most benefits go to a particular class of people. There was enormous rise in debt in this period. The debt levels. See, the capitalism saved banks after 2008, but the debt in some sense remained as an underlying problem that never really went away or disappeared. So you basically see the enormity of debt, that to bad quality debt, becoming a very important problem in the world economy even before the pandemic. And then there is destruction of public health institutions. So poor growth rates, high levels of inequality, high levels of debt, that to poor quality debt, and the destruction of public health were all contexts in which the pandemic, were all the contexts that existed already when the pandemic hit in January and February of 2020. Now, come the pandemic, I don't need to explain the pandemic in which I'm sure you are all well aware through multiple. We live in the age of webinars, so you're all aware of what has happened. What is the crisis that it has created, and so on. But I'll state just one point in introduction, which is that this is a very unique crisis. The uniqueness of the crisis lies in the fact that earlier crises that we have seen were either demand shortages, or supply shocks, or something that is arising due to speculation in the financial markets, as in 2008. This crisis, however, is different in that we have a problem where both the demand and supply are falling together. Right? There is a concurrent fall of demand and supply in the economy, and this is not something that economists of any hue are quite used to. We sort of see it in microeconomics textbooks, and we see that we say, and we sort of cop out of the situation by saying that prices become indeterminate when demand and supply fall together. Now, while that is indeed the case, most economists, whether on the right or on the left, were largely not clear how to address the crisis that emerges here when demand and supply fell together. For quite some time, probably not in the last century, have we seen a situation of this kind emerging. Now, this meant that many countries felt just as in 2008, many countries were now ready to come in and invest or spend significantly in the economy. Public government debt no longer matter. Public health, fiscal deficit no longer matter. As the German Chancellor said, whatever it takes for what? To save the capitalist economy from collapsing. This became a very important feature of the response of the governments. You see in multiple ways in which governments across the world have responded to the pandemic. I'll quickly give you a summary of what the state in different developed countries have done. Take agriculture. I'll give you one point there, and I'll move on to industry and other sectors. Take the United States. The farmers constitute a very important support base of Donald Trump. So what Trump did very clearly was he took the agricultural price that the farmers received in January, in March, and in May, and given a quantity, you will compute the extent of loss the farmer has incurred because of a fall in price, taking January as the base price. And 80% of this assumed loss of the farmer was simply given to the farmer as cash. 80% of the loss of the farmer was given to the farmer as cash. Right? This was Donald Trump. Okay, no less a person. Right? Now, this became this is what happened in the agricultural sector. Take the industrial sector, particularly the small and medium enterprises sector. You take OECD countries, take the United States and so on, you will see again significant amounts of money being spent into reviving and supporting these enterprises, as well as workers involved in these enterprises. A variety of financial facilities have been provided to the SMEs in most countries. You will see temporary tax relief in countries like Italy, deferred payments that you don't need to pay any tax now, pay it later. Austria, Belgium, France, etc. You will see direct financial support to SMEs like fresh loans, loans at zero interest rate, loans without collateral. Japan, France were countries which experimented with this. Quick processing of loan applications, provision of government guarantees, provision of insurances to all these industries which were reeling under the crisis. Penalties payable on delayed payments have been suspended in many countries. Many governments have offered themselves to organize for conflict mediation and strengthen business resilience. The most important factor then comes in the form of regulatory forbearance. Regulatory forbearance has been used to the maximum extent possible in many countries to offer assistance to small and medium enterprises. The European Union has what is called as the Corona Response Investment Initiative, worth about 37 billion euros. It has now increased for spending in healthcare systems, small and medium enterprises, workers, vulnerable parts of the society, and so on. Now, all this, remember, the intervention in the 27 countries of the European Union already is about 5 to 10% of their GDP. 5 to 10% of their GDP has already been spent by the state in these countries to save these countries from the crisis. The German bazooka is well known. The government offers immediate access to loans worth up to 500,000 euros for small businesses through its public bank. The public bank provides, the KfW provides this loan to small businesses. The loans are being made available at an interest rate of 1% and with no interest payable in the first 2 years. Right? The United Kingdom's package is also well known. The furlough package. The furlough package primarily means that the firms are told it's a right-wing government. It's a government of Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak, the Indian, is the Minister of Finance there, equivalent to the Minister of Finance. Their policy, their furlough policy, was that firms are told, in order to protect employment, firms are told you should not lay off even one employee. As long as you keep people in their payroll, in your payroll, we will ensure that 50 to 80% of their wages to be paid to them will be paid to you by the government of United Kingdom. Of the wages of workers will be simply transferred from the public exchequer to the private institutions so that they are able to keep workers in the payroll and keep providing them salaries. And 50 to 80% of that will be provided, subsidized by the state. That's the kind of intervention that you see in the highly advanced capitalist economies. This is also available to self-employed workers, gig economy workers, that is Uber, Ola workers, and so on, because they are not entitled to sick pay. All kinds of sections of the society are now receiving this kind of assistance. The point I'm trying to make is the following. So just we saw in 1930, we saw in 2008, we again see in 2020 that the role of the state vis-a-vis the market becomes a non-issue for the capitalist world whenever the capitalist world is in a crisis. Right? Now that becomes a very important. So it's no more a question of whether is it a public good? Do we have externalities? Do we have moral hazard? Do we have adverse selection? Is there increasing returns to scale? These are not special cases anymore. The whole economy is collapsing, and hence you need, in some sense, the intervention of the government in a very significant form. If you see that period after 2008, you saw one important policy that was followed by governments was the idea of quantitative easing. That's what you saw in most capitalist countries, where you buy bonds on a large scale from the market and push money into the economy. This became a very important way in which the United States and many European countries moved out of the financial crisis of 2008. And that has continued till recently, and that has again been revived. Fiscal deficit is no more a concern for most capitalist countries today. They are ready to go up to 10% of the GDP to save the economy from crisis. Remember, this 10% of the GDP that we are talking about is just to hold on till the crisis is over. The crisis is continuing. And what they're trying to do is to spend this money to keep employment intact, keep firms intact, so that when the reopening happens, the firms can actually come back in a state that they were maybe in February or March. Now, this means that it's not a revival package in a classical Keynesian sense. We're not there because supply chains are still broken everywhere. There's no point in pushing money into the economy in the old classical Keynesian form, because there's no supply forthcoming. So basically, most of the money that is being spent now is basically relief. It's not revival in the Keynesian sense. That is coming. That is going to come in the next 2 months. I basically see another 10% of the economy going to be spent by most developed countries if they have to, once the pandemic is over, once the lockdown is over, not the pandemic, the lockdown is lifted, in order to revive these economies, to create demand in these economies, you will need another 5 to 10%. So basically, we might see by December of 2020, about 20% of the GDP being spent by the state in these capitalist countries to save the economy from collapse and to revive it, both considering both together. That is unprecedented. Never in the history of the world economy has this kind of intervention been attempted. Nobody trusts the market anymore. That argument does not have any credibility in the current time. Everyone wants the state, so the state is going to come in a big way for sure in the near future. And the question clearly comes is, where is all this money going to come from? 10% of the GDP, 20% of the GDP, where is it going to come from? It has to come from somewhere. Right now, that is where another holy cow has been unleashed, and it was considered some kind of a sacrilege to even think of that option in the last 20 years. Monetization of deficits. Monetization of deficits has now become the most important way in which you are now trying to mobilize the finances required in order to revive the economy. What is, you all know what is monetization of deficit. I'm not going to get into it, but basically the government uses the central bank reserves, or the ability of the central bank to create new currency, to make them print money and to provide them to the government so that they are able to finance all the requirements of meeting the crisis. Now, meeting for taking steps required to meet the crisis. Now, monetization of finance has become very important in this period. People are openly talking about helicopter money, which is a brother of monetization of deficits. Here again, the central bank comes. Basically, you bring a helicopter into the skies and then drop money. That's not literally so, but that's precisely what monetization of deficits would mean effectively. So this becomes a very important. People have realized that monetary policy has simply has a role which is considerably. It's not an active role that monetary policy has to play. If it's fiscal policy that has to play a role, and the state has to come in and it has to employ steps like monetization of finance to meet its requirements. Now, this is another way in which the state has come in a very important way back into the story. Now, another important point, and I'll sort of close in about 5 minutes from now, that will make it an R. So another important feature of intervention, another important not feature, let me call it a realization of most countries in this period has been that the role of public health is central in the future. Now, the revival of public health will become a very important agenda for most governments of the world in the next 20 or 30 years. That's for sure. I would see enormous amounts of money flowing into creating resilient health systems, creating hospitals, doctors, nurses, care staff, infrastructure, etc. That will become a very important component of public policy in the next few years. And in countries like India, which have historically underinvested in health, you will see that you should see the state coming in and putting in at least 2 to 3% of the GDP into creating a good public health system. Now, if you see the responses of most business presses, which is a very important indicator of how thinking is ongoing. If you read Financial Times, The Economist, etc., you will basically see that even they are now advocating a major rethink in economics, the way economic policy is organized in order to in the conduct of economic policy in the near future. The Economist has an article 3 weeks back, where it exhorted a rethink in macroeconomics, in the way in which we see fiscal policy as a problem and monetary policy as an easy solution that has to be rethought. The role of the state in social sector has to be rethought. The importance of the universal basic income has to be brought in, and these are ideas that Economist has now advocated. The Financial Times as well, a few weeks back, had very important editorials where they argued that the role of the state has become much more important given the context of the pandemic than before. So what do you expect in the post-COVID? I don't use that word often. In the post-COVID economy, things will change. Things will change. But are you going to see an end to capitalism and so on? No, I don't see that. I don't think that is going to. That is an outcome that you can expect. But you will very clearly see that the market will certainly be considerably socially regulated in the future. Right? At least for some time to come. The market is likely to be considerably socially regulated. The state is likely to come in and play a very important role, an increased role, an expanded role in investment, regulation, and planning in the next 20 to 30 years. Because there's no other way you can revive the economy from the kind of crisis that it is in now. In many cases, you are likely to see a revival of the idea of welfare state within capitalism. You are likely to see the revival of it. So in public education, public health, these are likely to be a larger role with the intervention of the state. The other important change that you are likely to see is the very attitude to the problem of fiscal deficits. Fiscal deficits, now it has been accepted across the world that is not such a poisonous animal as it was thought to be in the mainstream literature. It becomes essential on many occasions, and you are also likely to see the idea of fiscal deficit likely to remain with us in an uncontested form for at least 20 to 25 years. Now, I'm not going to be an astrologer to say what is going to happen after 20 to 25 years. I don't know. But the point is that you are going to see a very, very fundamental redefinition of the way we see the debate between state and the market. It's not anymore going to be state coming in only during the time of market failures. As I explained in the initial part of my presentation, that you are likely to see the role of the state being accepted in a much warmer sense. As we say in Malayalam, വളരെ ഊഷ്മളമായ ഒരു സ്വാഗതം state intervention കിട്ടാൻ സാധ്യതയുണ്ട്. But it's going to be seen with less derision in the future is going to be welcomed in a different way. And I hope that the economics literature also responds to the crisis in that sense. That is, the economics literature, also the mainstream economics also undergoes considerable rethink inside it. It allows multiple perspectives to come in. It allows heterodox views, Marxist views, institutional views, etc., to flourish inside it. That kind of openness is required in economics departments that we see across the world. Across the world, economics departments have been confined to or have been populated with people who think in very narrow terms about the economy, and that has to change. Textbooks have to change. The way we organize teaching of economics has to change. The way we run our economics journals have to change. The way we think about sort of practicing economics has to change. And I think the pandemic has brought home that point forcefully. And I hope that this kind of change will happen. But at the same time, this is not going to happen smoothly. We as teachers and students of economics, in my view, have to take a leadership role in redefining economics, at least in the classroom. That is a process that has to begin with us. That is something that has to start now, and only then can we expect a larger change in the thinking around how economies should be done, how what kind of state do we want, what kind of market do we want, and so on. That rethinking depends also on all of us, how we engage in the classroom and outside the classroom, how we teach, how we learn, what we read, and so on. I think these are things that will govern the changes in the near future, but the role of the state and market, that debate will be fundamentally different after 2020 than it was in the past. Thank you very much for the time given to me for this presentation. If I don't know the format of this, if there is time available, I'll be happy to take a few questions if there are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, RAMAKUMAR sir, for that beautiful presentation. Actually, whatever you have said, I hope that it has brought in some kind of a space for introspection in all of us, especially for the research scholars, academicians, and all of us who are dealing with economics. Thank you so much. Now, I think, sir, we'll move on to some of the questions. Like the participants, I'm sure they'll have lots of questions to ask. And participants, lots of questions are coming in, sir. Can you?
Yes.
Are you able to see?
I am able to see. Yes. So I'll try to answer some of them. I'll take it in that order. In a usual face-to-face seminar, I can collect questions, but here I'll sort of see. I can see them as they come. So I will try to answer them in that order. The first question is. Sunita Nair is not so optimistic like me to assume that the market is going to be socially regulated in the future. I am not disagreeing with you. Neither am I saying that I'm overly optimistic. But you will see, I'm offering a very short-term assessment. I'm not offering a long-term assessment. I do see that at least for the next 1 decade. And now you can just see that I reduced my time frame from 25 years to 10 years, thanks to your question. So basically, you will see a redefinition of the way in which state and market debate is being conducted. In what ways, I'm not predicting here, but I'm certain to see. It's certain that we will see a rethink on that debate and on the parameters based on which that debate will be conducted. Now, what those parameters will be, how they will be conducted, and what will be the outcome of all that? Will we have a revolution in our textbooks? I don't know. I'm not predicting. I'm not going that far to predict it. But what I'm saying is we will see a rethink, and that rethink, the nature of that rethink, its outcome and all is dependent on all of us, on how we sort of conduct ourselves during that debate. Nabila has the question that we are likely to see a revival of welfare state in a capitalist structure. How do you rate the Indian government in its financial management? I say there's a difference between capitalist world and countries like India, where in the capitalist world, the developed world, what you're basically seeing is a welfare state that existed in a big way. That welfare state was weakened from the 70s and 80s onwards, and you are now vulnerable. That public health system or that welfare state system has now been rendered vulnerable given the pandemic. Now, in developing countries like India, we never had a welfare state to begin with. We simply did not have a comprehensive social security policy. It's not to rebuild the welfare state. Our job is to build the welfare state, right? Is to create the welfare state. So the challenges are very different in the developed world and the developing world. So what the Indian government has done, or during and I see a question of the Atmanirbhar package as well. The Atmanirbhar package is highly deceptive. Okay, the argument is that 20 lakh crore is going to be spent in the economy. What is this 20 lakh crore? If you carefully analyze the nature of this 20 lakh crore package, you will see that not more than 1 lakh crore, I say this, not more than 1 lakh crore out of this 20 lakh crore is going to be a fiscal stimulus. 19 lakh crore out of this 20 lakh crore is going to be a monetary policy stimulus. That is, loans being given out by banks to farmers, to small and medium enterprises, to corporates, etc., in order to revive themselves after the pandemic, or during and after the pandemic. So, if you look at across the world, you basically see that 40%, 35 to 40% of the packages announced by countries across the world are fiscal policy components. Right? The rest, 50 to 60%, are monetary policy components. This is IMF's estimate in April and May. If you look at India, it's less than 5%. Right? So what is 40% is the component of fiscal policy across the world. In India, the component of fiscal policy is less than 5% in the Atmanirbhar package. Atmanirbhar package is also being used in a very perverse way to push an agenda of liberalization, to push an agenda of neoliberal policy, which every other country across the world is overturning. Right? Every other country in the economy, every other country across the world is actually returning to the state. They are actually reviving the intervention of the state. They are actually nationalizing institutions. They are actually spending in the economy, forgetting about fiscal deficit. In India, you're actually trying to reverse. You're trying to generate money for interventions, not through taxes, not through monetization of finance, but through disinvestment. Right? So use this as an opportunity to push an agenda of liberalization, which has been discredited across the world. The whole world is disbanding it and is going back to the state. You're actually walking in the opposite direction. Right? That is so. The presence of the small presence of fiscal component in the package, the state's effort to see it as a chance, as an opportunity to push for more privatization. These are all problems that I see in the Indian context. I don't quite see the revival of a welfare state happening in the Indian context as easily as it might result in the Western world. Excuse me. Kashif Mansoor has this question. Why do you say that the role of the state is becoming significant? Though the state is intervening, they are to the advantage of big capitalism. Yes. Look, I am not saying here that the intervention of the state or that you see across the world is primarily going to result in a post-capitalist outcome. No, I'm not saying that. I said that the effort that is ongoing across the world is an effort to save the capitalist economy and society from collapsing. So it is a policy to somehow survive. It is a policy to somehow hold on. Right? It is not a policy to overturn the economy. Let's be very clear on that. What the debates that we spoke about, I said in the beginning itself that I see the role of the state in a very different sense as a Marxist myself. I see the role of the state in a capitalist economy as one actively aiding and facilitating the accumulation processes in the economy. Right? There's no doubt about it. That is exactly what will happen here also. But we are talking about a redefinition of the state and the market within the capitalist format that we are discussing. I'm not talking about outside the capitalist structure at all. So in that sense, the state will continue to serve the interests of big capitalists and global financial capital. I have no doubt about it. But there might be a rethink on some aspects of that intervention. There might be a rethink on certain aspects of that policy. That's all I'm saying. Whether it will lead to a post-capitalist society and economy with very different economic policies, economic structure, and so on, that will depend a lot on how the crisis proceeds from here. A lot of the aspects of the crisis in the near future are not predictable. Once they unravel, once they come out in the open, there is likely to be an intensification of the crisis. And at that point of time, how political, social movements and all across the world will mobilize themselves, put themselves together towards the creation of a new world or new world economies, new world economic structure, and so on. Those are all possibilities. They also will depend upon how things progress from here. And I only said that I'm not going to predict it like an astrologer. We will see as it comes. But I'm hopeful. I'm not pessimistic. I'm hopeful. Krishnan, India's chief economic advisor, he's a fool. He has no credibility. Okay, I'm sorry to say this publicly. He's probably going to go down as India's worst chief economic advisor. Right? His argument that we should wait till a vaccine comes in order to revive the economy with a fiscal stimulus is utter bunkum and bogus. Right? It is an extraordinarily it's an elite Brahminical argument. May I say it? I'm going to use that word here. Right? It shows the sheer not just disrespect. The sheer callousness that the state has towards the way in which people are living under this pandemic. The people are crying for relief. The people people want some kind of, either in kind as food or other items, or in the form of a cash transfer, or in the form of a better social security system, or a better hospital systems, and so on. People are crying for some kind of intervention. And here is a state which says, I am going to not spend till the vaccine comes. Okay, Keynes famously said long back, in the long run, we're all dead. Right? That's precisely the context that the argument that comes from. If you wait for 2 or 3 years for that so-called intervention of Mr. Krishnamurthy to come, India is not likely to remain in any healthy form at that time. So I don't take this guy seriously at all. For his V-shaped recovery that he's talking about, he is possibly going to result in an I-shaped recovery. The eye keeps going down; it doesn't revive ever. So that is likely to happen. So suddenly he will say, no, we are going to see a W-shaped and so on. So he use all letters of the alphabet to create some kind of a recovery story. But I stick to the I story of recovery if you don't intervene decisively. Whether markets have whether markets have a passive role in economic development of developing countries during the pandemic. Markets will continue to have a role. Markets, please don't think markets will die. Markets are not going to go away or anything. Markets are going to stay. Even when you create a post-capitalist world, markets will remain in some form or the other. In fact, that's a lesson that people have learned from the Soviet Union, in the sense that the way in which you see the formation of prices, formation of markets, and so on has to be different in a post-capitalist world. That's very clear. But the role of the importance of financial markets in guiding the economy, the importance of the stock market in guiding the economy, the importance of speculation in guiding the economy, those are markets which are extraordinarily imperfect and volatile, and they in the past have created enormous amount of havoc in the economy. Rethink is likely to be possible there to begin with, and then into other aspects of the economy. So when I say the role of the market will be redefined, I do see that redefinition as more prominent in certain aspects of the economy than other aspects. Adarsh, how far has the pandemic reiterated the need for a robust welfare state in India? I will use the word welfare state, not robust welfare state, because we simply don't have a welfare state to begin with. India is one of the few countries of the world which has absolutely no credible welfare state at all. Our job is to build it. Remember, we have to invest 6% of our GDP in education. We are investing only 3% of our GDP in education. We should have invested at least 3% of our GDP in health. We have invested only about 1 to 1.5% of our GDP in health. We have to invest in nutrition. We have to invest in other aspects of the economy which are fundamental to the material survival of people, right? Leave alone big industries and so on. I'm talking about basic primary investments in social sectors. That is something, or for a universal food security policy, a good PDS system to begin with. All these are very important. PDS reminds me of one thing, I should say it here, that for the last 20 years, neoliberal economists have consistently made the point that the PDS should be closed down. Right? They have said the PDS should be closed down, procurement of agricultural goods from the farmers should close down, and instead we should replace the PDS with a cash transfer to people to tide through their food security needs. The hollowness of this argument, how wrong this argument was, has been proved by the pandemic. If we had listened to these neoliberal economists and disbanded our PDS over the last 20 years, we would have been left with absolutely no institution to provide food relief to people during the pandemic. Right? PDS was so fundamental, so crucial in providing relief to people during the pandemic that the argument of these economists over the last 20 years to close down the PDS, wrong that argument has been proven by the pandemic. So I do see I do believe, I do trust that the need for a welfare state in India start building the welfare state in India will be appreciated better in the post-pandemic world. Thank you. What will be, Vinita, what will be the debt position of India after the pandemic in terms of debt servicing and sustainability? That's what I said. See, in order to finance the requirements of pandemic revival after the pandemic, you will have to think about multiple ways. You will have to borrow some money. You will have to print some money. You will have to generate money through some amount of taxes. You will have to look at multiple ways of generating resources in order to meet the requirements of your fiscal stimulus. Now, and of course, monetary policy. Monetary policy is also a component. So money in the banks should also be used to give loans to people and so on. Now, it has to be done. No, debt sustainability can be thought about after some time. But the point is, at this point of time, debt sustainability is not the concern, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. The debt has to be incurred. There is no doubt about it. How to repay the debt and so on, that's why I said the sustainability is important, but that sustainability point has to be seen alongside the fact that only a part of it should be debt per se. If you monetize the deficit, debt doesn't exist. So that's one important way of meeting your requirements. If you tax for example, if you introduce inheritance tax in India, right? In North India, you say Baap Kamal. Baap Kamal means you have inherited a huge mansion from your father. You simply get it for free. in the United Kingdom or other countries of the world, European world, you will have to basically pay 15% of the current market value of that asset that you're inheriting from your father as a inheritance tax to the government in order to get possession of your father's property. Otherwise, it will go to the government. Right? So these are taxes that you can think about with the kind of inequality that is building around us. Inheritance taxes, wealth taxes are possibilities to think about. So there are multiple ways. Some debt, some monetization, some taxation. All this should basically inform the way in which you try to finance the where is the next question? Vocal for the local. Vocal for the local is, I mean, I am not going to fall for these catchy slogans of Prime Minister. Stand up, sit down, walk, sit. I'm not going to sort of get into this whole play with words. Vocal for local was already embedded in post-Second World War economic policy thinking. When a lot of countries decided to have import substituting industrialization, they nationalized their banks, tried to attain food security, etc. They were all looking for some kind of self-reliance. So self-reliance is not a new thing that our Prime Minister has thought about. Self-reliance was embedded in the very thinking of economic policy in the post-war period. So there is nothing like it's a new thing, new argument. The whole program of liberalization, the whole program of free trade, the whole program of privatization, what it has led to over the years is the diminishing role of the idea of self-reliance in economic policy. So if vocal for the local is to be important, we have to begin by fundamentally rethinking our economic policy towards building self-reliance. If vocal for the local is not to remain simply a catchy political slogan, it has to also mean fundamental changes in the way economic policy is undertaken. I do not see that coming. Indian government is continuing to focus on privatization and other agendas, and I'm appalled that a Prime Minister in the same speech can speak about Atmanirbharta or vocal for local in 1 minute, and in the very next minute talking about disinvestment and its importance. Right? So these are contradictions in this line of thinking, which are very problematic. Migrant workers are fighting to live. Is our present policy enough to solve their problems? This is something that is related to how you build your welfare state after the pandemic. What the crisis has done is that it has brought forth the fundamental and critical role of migrant labor in our production systems and supply chains. That is something that we underappreciated in the past. The role of migrant workers has been now appreciated to be or understood to be extraordinarily important in the way our production systems are organized and our supply chains are organized. Now, this means that the approach of the state towards the welfare of migrant workers has to be a very important component of economic thinking or policy thinking in the next few years. Can KIFBI make a difference in this market system? In my view, it can. In my view, it can. In a situation where the ability of the state, particularly the state government in India, unlike the central government, which has very less number of degrees of freedom to run the economy, and institution like KIFBI allows you to look for off-budget borrowings to finance capital investment in the economy, which will actually help in a process of growth and employment generation. So in these situations, institutions like KIFBI can really help to create off-budget transactions to help economic growth. I'm looking for the next question. The last question is, which sectors of the economy are likely to recover the fastest? Which are the slowest? I see that here again you're asking for a prediction, but the agricultural sector is likely to remain largely in terms of growth rates, unaffected, in the sense that agricultural sector in India, the rural economy of India, the rural society of India has an extraordinary capacity of self-exploitation. Right? In moments of crisis, farmers of India, and workers in rural India, despite the high levels of losses, despite low prices, etc., are able to in some form continue to engage in production activities, regardless of what the conditions of the economy are. You saw it during demonetization, where the whole economy collapsed, but farmers continue to engage in production. You are seeing a similar situation during the pandemic as well. So agriculture is a sector which I think is likely to recover. It is likely to grow faster than other parts of the economy. However, agriculture constitutes only 15% of the GDP or GSDP, whether it's of India or of Kerala. So in that sense, its ability to drive the overall growth rates of the economy is limited. So I do not see that quite happening. If lockdown is lifted, tourism and other sectors are likely to grow. So that part of the services sector, transport, tourism, etc., are likely to grow earlier than other sectors. But we have to see. It's too early to say which will recover the fastest. Is this my old friend Rajesh Komat? Okay. Do you feel that the international financial institutions may give direction to countries like India well, yes, it should. If you look closely at how World Bank, IMF, etc., are putting out their policy briefs during the pandemic, you will basically see that they are also advocating major changes in the way economic policy is thought about and organized. And that is something that is very important and interesting. So you do see signals coming from these institutions that the old way of running the economy and organizing economic policy is no more sustainable and have to change. But what signals domestic policymakers sort of pick up and what they follow is something that is completely up to them. Signals are there that you can't have more debt, state will have to become more important. These are signals coming from World Bank, IMF, and so on. So in that sense, it is welcome, but that's not enough. For example, one of the most important things required in the near future will be, what are you going to do about the debts that many developing countries or underdeveloped countries, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and so on, are currently burdened with. You basically need a large program of debt waiver, international debt waiver. It is very important. So only that kind of international debt waiver can provide many developing countries and underdeveloped countries, particularly in Africa and Latin America, the policy space, the fiscal space to conduct an expansionary fiscal policy in the next 5 years. Right? Now, that is a very important signal that needs to come from these institutions. But at the same time, as we are speaking now, you do not see that kind of a strong signal coming from those institutions. So there are some positives, but there are also signals that should have come but have not come. So I would sort of put it that way in answering your question. How do you foresee this crisis affecting income inequalities between states? Well, those economies which are likely to grow faster are likely to be on the top, and those economies which will not grow fast are likely to remain at the bottom. So if you correlate the ability of the economy to revive with the already existing strength of the economy, then you are certainly likely to see a rise in income inequalities between states, between people, and so on. There's no doubt about that. I think I'll just pose this question to the organizers. How much time do we have? Am I overshooting?
No, take this as the last question, I think.
I'll take this as the last question. Okay. Mujib Rahman's question, I'll take as the last question. May I know why financial markets performing well all over the world, even when there is crisis due to COVID pandemic? Financial markets are not quite performing well in that sense. Put it this way. There is enormous money across the world. People are trying to park it somewhere. They need a destination to park it during the crisis, because there's no point spending during the crisis. There's no infrastructure creation possible or capital investment possible. So this money is currently being parked in the safest destination that they know of. What is the safest destination? Government bonds. Right? So government bonds have become the destination of much of loose private capital lying across the world. Right? And this has been allowing governments across the world to conduct their economic activities in the expansionary forms in which they have been envisaged. Now, this means, a lot of financial markets are also, they cannot sit idle with their money. They also have to invest it somewhere. So they're also looking for possibilities to move from country to country, depending on the arbitrages that are calculated on a real-time basis. Now, it is this urge of the financial investors to push money into those areas where there is enormous profits to be made, that is probably making it look like a rapid financial activity to you, but it's actually not a financial activity in the real sense of the term. A lot of money is moving into government bonds. A lot of money is indeed moving quickly to quickly park it at the safest location possible, and it is this that probably comes out as sharp financial sector activity, and much of financial sector transactions does not involve physical movement of goods. It involves the transfer of bills and papers, which can be done in a digital format now. So that is actually allowing financial markets, certain parts or sections of the financial market, to function or continue to operate in a normal form. That does not actually show unaffected. That does not show that financial markets are unaffected by the crisis. I'll stop my answers there. Thank you very much to Shaijan, his colleagues, and the Economics Department of John Matthai Center for giving me this opportunity. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this presentation as well. Thank you very much. Stay safe. I think you're muted. I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Dr. Ramkumar, it was such a nice presentation. Now we shall move to the concluding remarks by Dr. Shaijan Davis, who's the head of the Department of Economics, Dr. John Matthai Center, University of Calicut. Sir?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Dr. Ram.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Hi. Nice to hear you after some time. It was a wonderful session. It was exhaustive, I would say. In fact, I mentioned take it as the last question, and that was the last question in the list. There was no more questions in the list. It means that you have done justice to all the questions. No question was left. And we are also on time, because we scheduled the time from 11 to 12:30, and we are only just 12:35 or 40. So we did not surpass the time. So we also have here as participants Dr. Rajesh Kamath from MG University, Sunitha from Pioneer, and many other colleagues. And my duty is to conclude the session. I will take only 2 minutes. And if you all agree with me, Dr. Ramakumar has started his speech with an international and historical background, basically giving a theoretical background of why the state, why the market, and when the state. And he has put forward his own idea that the role of the state is not just there whenever there is a fall of the market, but it is there. It has to be there as a welfare state in a day-to-day manner, in a day-to-day affair. It has to intervene with the people. So this was his whole setting, especially in a Marxian framework. And with that setting, he has again explained the international experiences, how the countries, including the capitalist countries especially, manage the crisis, especially by spending at 10 to 20% of their GDP to the welfare programs to save the economy from the crisis. But this is the point where we are getting some kind of a confusion. We, in the sense, the people who do research on the economies of the world around and in the Indian economy are still getting confused. What is happening in India and the rest of the world? Where the rest of the world, especially the European economy, always refer as the capitalist countries, are moving so ahead with their expenditures and public debt even, and they are spending like they are the welfare state. But we initially thought that the capitalist countries are less welfare and more a market-oriented economy. But what we see now is that they are spending a lot on the welfare, even surpassing the countries like India. So is it something like, can we say that the countries are not going beyond a Keynesian conclusion of spending for the market? In fact, yeah, the countries are spending, the economies are spending 20 to 30, 10 to 20% of their GDP to revive the economy, but to revive the market economy. So we have not gone far beyond the Keynesian idea of boosting the economy again via the market. So the sole proposition towards a sole social welfare economy is yet to come. And that is what we also are being optimistic, especially in crisis-driven economies. Let us hope that the economies will be reviving in such a manner that the welfare of the people will be given much importance through the fiscal packages. Through the fiscal packages, we mean because the fiscal packages are very less, especially in the countries like India, where the monetary package is found to be much higher. So I am not going into the details of the points raised by Dr. Ramakumar. I would just say that he has given a nice idea, a theoretical and international historical idea about the role of the state and the market first. Then he has given an overview and an exhaustive idea of what is happening in India, its different sectors, the market and the state. One thing probably you missed, in fact, it is your own area of research, is in federalism, how the state works in a federalism. Because Dr. Ramakumar is famous with his article in 2006 in EPW on why do the states not spend, along with Dr. Thomas Isaac, where they argue, yeah, the states, there is a role of the state to do the welfare expenditures and all, but in a federal economy like India, the state need not spend as much as they like, because your fiscal responsibility act will not allow you to spend more. So whenever we speak about a state, the role of the state, there is a limiting factor in countries like India, which is called the federalism and its peculiar nature. So while considering that also into the present day's discussion, I would say that it is a comprehensive discussion about the entire happenings, especially during the COVID and largely during the crisis. How do the states respond and how do the market respond, and how should the market and how should the states respond? I congratulate, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Ramakumar. You yourself can see the number of messages that you get in the chat box regarding the informative presentation that you made. So on behalf of the Department of Economics, John Matthai Center, and also Vimala College, for your information again, to remind you, this is jointly organized with the Vimala College. We extend you a heartfelt thanks Thank you, Dr. Ramakumar.
Shaijan, I'm sorry. When I kept on saying faculty of the John Matthai Center, I should have added faculty of the John Matthai Center and Vimala College.
Yes.
I apologize for that oversight. Thank you to both departments and colleges for inviting me.
Yeah. The next is Dr. Vimala. I must thank Dr. Vimala because she was the person who mooted the idea of having a seminar or a webinar of this kind. She was here in the department. We were having a personal chat, and she informed that why can't we have a discussion on the changing markets in the Indian economy during the COVID. This was her initial idea. Then I thought, okay, we'll have a discussion on the market. Then why don't we define the theoretically what is a market and the state first, then we go to a market. And that is how the webinar became the realization. We started with a specific market called the labor market yesterday by Dr. Vinod Abraham, and the holistic idea today by Dr. Ramakumar. So for initiating this idea and hosting the seminar, I must thank Dr. Vimala of Vimala College. Thank you, Dr. Vimala, madam. I must also thank Dr. Sneha. She is the coordinator of this seminar, this webinar. I usually miss webinar and seminar. It's a slip of the tongue. Now, Dr. Sneha is the coordinator of this 2 days webinar. She is also from the Vimala College. I have no hesitation even praising her that she has wonderfully done this for these 2 days. When we started discussion about the seminar, we contacted even the director of the computer education at the University of Calicut, Dr. Lejish. He has also guided her in looking at the web link, especially putting in the YouTube link and all. And she has suddenly responded to his idea, and she has done it timely. I would rather say that people like you, people like me, in fact, is cherished to have the services of people like you to take up the role of a coordinator and doing it your own in a wonderful manner. It's a lesson to many other people who easily wish to have time to skip these kind of opportunities. So I must thank Dr. Sneha for wonderfully organizing this seminar.
Thank you so much, sir.
I also thank the participants, including Dr. Rajesh Komak, Sunita, Dr. Christabel, she was there yesterday, and many other teachers from different colleges and universities in South India and even the other parts of the country who joined us for the seminar. And especially because of their participation, the seminar became a successful one. So I think there may be a formal lot of thanks again, I don't know, but I was asked to conclude the session. Let me conclude by giving my heartfelt thanks to my own colleagues of this department and the colleagues of Vimala College. And let us be proud that we had a wonderful time, 2 days time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ramakumar, once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vimala. Thank you, Dr. Ramkumar. Thank you, Dr. Shaijan, on all the participants. Actually, the feedback form, it was, structured well, but I don't know what suddenly happened. But I'll be able to email you all your feedbacks and all. No issues regarding that. If there are unregistered participants who just, joined in using the Google link, just add in your mail ID so that I'll be able to send you without fail and delay. Thank you so much once again. Yeah, let's conclude then that's it. Okay, have a nice day. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
See you,
all the
Dr.
participants.